Is everyone able to hear me? Lasso. So the uh, so the file for today's lesson has been sent in the chat. Those who are able to view it clearly on the screen, please continue viewing it on the screen. Those who are unable to view it clearly on the screen, open the same in whichever screen that you're using, the file that has been sent. Today we're going to discuss the fifth grammatical case, the ablative case, and then before that we're going to talk a little bit about a small clarification on usage of those particles which we had discussed it previously. It has to do with those particular particle which name without the needing or the without requiring that particle to have the punctuation tick, which we know as this small dot that we have here. So there are particles which can associate with particular name, and when they do so, they do not require to be written with the particular punctuation tick. And so before we go to the fifth grammatical case, we're going to discuss some of those particles and how these particles are used with their associative name. Now, before we begin our class, let us begin with the verse of dedication. So today's verse of dedication is to Mother Saraswati. Of Mother Saraswati, let us begin our class, and may Mother Saraswati bestow upon us the auspiciousness so that our class would be beneficial to everyone attending it. Okay, so I will be reading the verse once in Tibetan, and this time I have already translated it in English. And let me change this. Oh, Pemo Shirab Hese Yangchen Ma, Rabkar Peme Semo, Rabzema, Ishi Hesir Trauma Yangchen Ma, Shirab Dreme Kuson Tula Du. So this particular verse, the first one is the line of dedication, which means I prostrate to the lamp of wisdom. Lamp of wisdom, which is the name of the Saraswati. Then we have the verse of dedication. Most glorious light of wisdom, Saraswati, most beautiful moonlight princess of the lotus, the goddess of wisdom, emitting the rays of wisdom, I prostrate to the body, speech, and mind of the lamp of wisdom. So I prostrate to Mother Saraswati, and taking this verse as our symbol and our symbol of auspiciousness, let us begin today's class. So in today's class, we're just going to discuss some particles which have rules that tells us that there needn't be used with a name and have the requirement to be to have the punctuation at the end of the name that it is associated with. And we're going to briefly introduce. So when I say briefly introduce, briefly only applies to the association and the usage case, but we're going to introduce the particles and talk briefly about the usage case. So therefore, a very brief explanation on the ablative case. Okay, so the first verse, from the Tree of Excellent Speech. 惹入意行人諗，更不面公為劇，好冚其孔度戚，若當咩幫提醒。So here, this verse, this does not tell us about this does not tell us about any new particle, but this is a rule that tells us that the particles that we have already studied previously, there is some certain rule that pertains to these particles and the usage of these particles. And so that particular rule is being discussed here. Okay, so from the Tree of Excellent Speech, for the particles re, ru, yi, hang, yang, so these 5 particles, the differences of whether having the punctuation sek. So what do we mean by sek? We mean this small punctuation that we use to separate a syllable. So it's a syllable separator, meaning that any combination or structure of consonants and vowels that we have, which is in between these punctuations, or if it's the first syllable, then it's the structure that is until the usage of this punctuation is a single syllable, meaning that any manipulation, any change in the word that each of the parts or the components of the combination is going to have in context to the sound will be limited between these 2 punctuations. For example, this particular syllable is kong, and it is a syllable which is a combination of 3 characters, ka, o, nga, in which we have 2 consonants and a single vowel. And so the sound of this particular consonant, which is in the general classification of consonants, we have understood this as to be the foundation of name. In some translation, it's understood as the name basis. So the foundation of name here has the sound ka. It's not ga, ka. So the sound is much softer here, ka. And then with the addition of naro, naro is the name of the symbol, the vowel. The actual sound is o. So ko. And then with the addition of the suffix letter nga, the entire structure sounds kong. And so as we see that each of these components somehow manifest in the final sound, that each of these components have a certain influence over each other. But the main core being the sound ka, because it's the foundation of name, and we have learned that the foundation of name, core sound, the key sound of any word, meaning that you can make any changes to it, but still the main element or the main core sound should be the foundation of name. It cannot be something like you have the ka as the foundation of name and the sound becomes ngo. This is not possible. The other affixes that we have talked about, for example, the prefix, the suffix, and the post-suffix, they have their own influence over the foundation of name and change the sound of the foundation of name according to the usage of that particular suffix. And it also depends on the masculinity and the femininity of the sound. How feminine a sound is or how masculine a sound is. So it takes that also in the consideration to whether how much change in the sound will take place. So therefore, this punctuation functions in that manner. And then the other thing, it also helps us in reading because it tells us that anything within this particular in the bound of the bound of this particular punctuation needs to be pronounced singularly. So therefore, this particular punctuation is known as tek. So for the particles re, ru, yi, hang, yang, the differences of whether having the punctuation tek, and that will be discussed in the explanation as it follows. The same is also applicable for particles such as ho, hu, hum. So these three particles also function similar to these particles, and this will also be explained in detail. We're going to talk about the first few lines. It states, 당을 친사회 sikche reru yi hang tang yang. So you will recognize these particle from the you will recognize these six particle from the dependent particle that we have already covered. The first one, reru, reru is from the particle used in place of la, the seven particles which are used in place of la, la de. Yi is from the relative particle, the sixth grammatical case, yi and yi, and with the sa. So we're not going to specifically talk about this ones with the third grammatical case because it follows the rule which is similar to the sixth grammatical case. So there is no need to emphasize or to specify the sixth grammatical case because the difference is whether or not we have the sa or not. For the sixth grammatical case, we have particles such as he and yi, but for the third grammatical case, we have yi and yi. So we're not going to specify anything we're not going to specify anything for the third grammatical case because it functions similarly. So there's no use of specifying it. Just understanding that it applies for the sixth grammatical case, we'll understand that it applies similarly to the third grammatical case. So the six particles, re, ru, yi, hang, yang. These are the six particles, in which the first two are from the particles used in place of la, la de. The second two are from the third of sixth grammatical case, ide, particles possessing the first vowel. And then the last two, hang and yang, are from the ornamental and inclusive case, gindu. So these are the particles that we have already studied. So Teng, Mun, Chin, Cawa means the particles that we have already discussed in earlier classes, such as ra, ru, yi, hang, yang. Jie la, cik, ra, yi, hang, tang, ru, yi, yang, Drubpay, keban ni, cikan la, ciki, kang wa tang, ciki kang tang ma kang ki kebar teres. Ciki kang wa tang ma kang ki kebar teres, meaning that the difference between these six particles, which are ra, ru, yi, hang, yang. So these six particles, yi, hang, ra, yi, hang, and ra, yi, hang, and ru, yi, yang. The difference between them is when they are associated, when these particles are associated with a particular name that it follows. The difference is if whether there is need for putting the punctuation tek, which is this dot, in between. So at the end or at the end of the name. So when we say at the end, we mean at the end of the name, meaning between this particle and the name, if whether we should or if whether there is a need to put the tek at the end of the name. So the first three, ra, yi, hang, they do not require. Whereas the second three, ru, yi, yang, they require for the punctuation to be there. So, teni, sikte ra hi hangsumni, ki kangbar, tsegi kang mikyo pares. Then, the three particles, ra hi hang, will not require the punctuation, tsek, at the end of the narration, at the end of the name. So let us change this to name. And observe that, please notice that the name is with the capital N. It is of some significance, meaning that this name represents the entire terminology and not just a naming word. So when we are using particles such as ra, yi, hang, it is not required to write the punctuation, check the dot, between the name it is associating with and the particle. So, pena. Lobtar dro. Lobtar dro. Nye mingla tenzi sirki yu. Kong chuang pyoge jongken re. Please notice that in these particular examples, the particle which is ra here, and the name that it is associating with, lobta, and in this particular syllable ta, we are not using the punctuation. We're not using the punctuation in between ra and ta. Similarly, there is no punctuation between nga and hi, and then similarly, kong cho hang, between cho and hang, there is no punctuation. This tells us that these particles do not require punctuation between the name that it is associating and the particle. And that particular punctuation is called tsek, this dot, which separates a syllable. Tadung, tsikte ru yi yang sumni, tsigi kang bar, tsegi kang bar. Upon that, the three particles, ru, yi, yang, these three particles, will require the punctuation, that is tsek, at the end of the name, at the end of the name. So it will require the punctuation in between the name that the particle is associating with and the particle itself. Penna, lobta rutro. Here we see that the particle is ru and it is following the name ta. And as it is following this particular name, or this, in this case, this particular syllable, we see that there is the usage of this dot. That is the syllable separator, known as tek. So these two are same sentences, but the usage of the particle is different. Though it will not change the meaning of the, statement. It will not change the meaning of the statement at all. It will not change the meaning of the statement, but it is used sometimes, especially in poetry. It is used especially in poetry, because when you write it in this manner, you observe that there are only three syllables, lob tar do. But if you write it in this manner, you have four syllables, lob tar ru do. So in some poetry, when you're writing certain type of poetry, for example, if you're writing a poetry which requires 6 syllable, or let's say 9 syllable, and if you're writing lob tar do, and you're only able, so you have written something, and then you're writing lobtar do, and then in total, if your line only has 8 syllable, then what you do is that you, instead of using lobtar, this particle ra, you use the particle ru, and now you have 9 particles in total, because now these two, the particle and the second syllable of this word becomes separate syllable, and so you have 9 syllable. So for those kind of reason, there is the difference between these two syllable. So here we see nye mingla tenzin sirkiyu, ngai mingla tenzin sirkiyu. Two statements, two different particles are used, and the usage of the particle, the difference between the usage of the particle is dependent on the usage of the punctuation tek. Here we are using tek, whereas here we don't have that particular punctuation. Then you can also observe the same here. Ngan chuang pyoge jongkin ngan kong chuang pyoge jongkin re. The difference is not in the usage of it's not in the usage case of the particle. The difference is in the particle, and the difference is the presence of the punctuation. So we see that here we see that these two have same meaning whatsoever, but the number of syllable has differed by one. So this is what the first two line is telling us about. The differences, the difference between these three particles and these three particles lie merely on the fact that there is the presence of the punctuation, which is tek. If we have the punctuation, then these will be associated with the first three with these three particles. If we do not have that punctuation, it will be associated with these three particles. Okay, so now the second two lines of the verse tells us the second two lines, which is so it means that the same is applicable for the particles such as ho, hu, hum, in which one must understand that ho and hum, these two are particles, but hu is a companion word. So we have been differentiating these two both in the grammatical class, both in the grammar class as well as the reading class, the intermediate reading class, where we have been talking about the difference between the companion word and the particles. So in cases where we have the particles, they have their own function in the name. Whereas the companion word, if in many cases, they are just an addition rather than having a meaning by themselves. Sometimes they do have meaning, sometimes they don't have meaning in particular way. It's just written for easier pronunciation, or sometimes to elaborate the pronunciation of a word. And so here, hu is just a companion word, whereas ho and hum both are particles that we have already discussed. Ho, we have discussed this during the first grammatical case in the recompound particle. Hum, we have discussed this under the differentiating and inclusive case. I think we discussed this particular one before this quite recently. So hum, differentiating and inclusive case. So both of these particle ho and hum, as well as the companion word hu. So it states sikto hu tang sikte ho ta ham la yang ra hi hang tar sigi kang par sikang mikyo so, which means that's similar to the particles ho and hum and the companion word hu. The particles ra, hi, and hung. It's similar to the usage of the particles ra, hi, and hung, the first three particles. Even these do not require the punctuation, which is tek, at the end of the name. So let me change this to name. End of the name. So for example, we have Q. Q means puppy. Piu means calf. Tiu means a young horse. And then we have Miu Tongzhuk. Miu Tongzhuk is actually so it comes from it's according to the Tibetan it's according to the Tibetan tradition. So according to Tibetans, the first humans or so came uh, from the uh, from the two the male and the female. The male being uh, the ape, the bodhicitta ape, and the female being the wisdom incarnate as the uh, female demon. And then from then came out the six different kinds of human. So these six, let me write these six. So these are called Neotunga. Let's see in future if we will get to discuss more about this. But just the names. So the first one is Se, the second one is Mu, the third one is Tong, fourth one is Tong, then we have Tu, and then finally Da. So these are the four uh, ancestral children of uh, the, the father, which is the Bodhisattva ape, and the mother, wisdom incarnate. That is the mother is the wisdom incarnate demon. So they had six children, and out of these six children, it is said that this uh, this this the this is the actual ancestral of the Tibetan people, and then we will discuss about these later. It has to do with more with history and less with the grammar. So okay, so these are the six ancestral children of the first humans according to Tibetan. So these are called Miu Tongzhuk. And more emphasis on the usage of who here as a companion word. We don't use the tick in between me and who. So Q, Piu, Tiu, Miu, and then Chiu. This we are quite familiar with, Chiu. And also notice that I have highlighted this in blue to differentiate this with the particles. The particles are in the green, whereas the connective particles are in the green, whereas the companion words are in blue. Okay, now Chao, Miu, these are the recompound particle. And then we have Tam, which means edge or center. Gam, Kyo, are you happy or sad? Should I be happy or sad, for example? So this is option which we already talked about during the differentiating case. Okay, so till this point we have understood the usage, the rule pertaining some of these particles on the basis of whether you're going to use the punctuation between the name and the associated name and the particle or not. Okay. Naming apa chungkung. To fifth grammatical case, the ablative case. We're only going to discuss this very briefly. We're not going to go in depth about the usage case. So we're only going to introduce the particles, and then and then introduce a little bit about the usage cases. So, lekshe jong wale nele chungkung ka tu the chungkung la khangchar tu riktun karta riktun karne mitun le du la ne drop khona chuk. So this particular verse talks about the ablative case from the tree of excellent speech. The ablative particles ne and le are used in ablative case, separating and inclusive case. So there are three usage case of these two particular particles. So first, we are introduced to the two particles of the ablative case. These two particles are ne and le. So the first one is ne, the second one is le. So the ablative particles ne and le and ne are, sorry, this is not and, but are used in ablative case, separating case, and inclusive case. So we have the usage case. Either ne or le can be used for ablative case, meaning that we can use either ne or le. So we can use both. So let me just structure this much better. Okay, so this is much better. So both ne and le can be used for ablative case. So when it's the usage case of the ablative case, both ne and le used. For separation as a distinguished section, we must use le. So we will discuss what we mean by distinguished section. For separation with same section, use ne. So we'll also discuss what same section means when we talk about that particular usage case. And this particular particle has many subgroup of usage cases. So it has quite a lot of sub usage cases. So means subgroup of a particular usage case. That is the separation case. So, and let's see if in this particular point we might also talk about the since we have the ablative case, we might talk about the different type of cause. So we have different classification in cause. So we might talk about cause over here, and then let's see if we have more time. We'll also talk about different type of effects of particular cause, but that will depend on how much time we have to discuss on this particular grammatical case. But those will be some extra information. So we'll see accordingly. Okay, then for inclusive case, only ne should be used. So if it's a statement of inclusive case, only ne should be used. So let us clarify here. It states that there are two particles of ablative case. There are two ablative particles. So there are two ablative particles. The two are ne and le. Ne and le. For some usage case, we have seen that some have 11 particles, some has 7, some has 4, 5, some has 3. So for the particle used in place of la, there were 7. For the particle possessing the first vowel e, there were 5. For the continuative particle, there were 3. For the ornamental and inclusive particle, there were 3. And then for the differentiating and inclusive particle, there were 11. And for this ablative case, we understand that there are only 2, which are ne and le. So ne and le are the ablative particles. So So the ablative particles are dependent particles. So these comes under dependent particle, but very different from what we have been learning. So now the dependency, the thing is now the dependency changes. For all the particles that we have learned before this, we have studied them in a way that the depending factor, the things on which it depends, was the suffix letter. But now we're going to introduce a different type of dependence here. So, 穷公子这你呢，特想往建议呢，让建筑于明白，这次呢建筑那米的把它成就了对手。Meaning, note that the dependence for the ablative case is not on the suffix letters. It does not depend on the suffix letters at all. But the usage case here, it depends on the usage case. That means different usage case require different particles. There are only two particles, meaning that both of them can be used for different usage case. Depending on which usage case, either of this will be used. So, ne dan le ki chulunis, chungkung tempala chupa, garwala, dupa. Ne and le are used in the following usage cases: the ablative case, the separating case, and the inclusive case. So only 3 usage cases. So according to, see if not here. So according to the verse, it states that both ne and le can be used for ablative case. So for the usage as an ablative case, to show that something has originated from something has come out of things, something was derived out of something, we're going to use ne and le. And this is used interchangeably. This is used entirely to our preference. We can either use ne or we can use le. So for both ne and le can be used for ablative case. And for separation as a distinguished section, so there is a separating case, which is karwa, which is separating case. More like separation in a case where you're trying to not separate something just to separate, but separation in a way to highlight something, to emphasize some, more like to emphasize something, to put something in their own category. So for separation as distinguished section, meaning that whatever is being separated is of its own section, meaning that even though it is being separated from a group, it is separated or highlighted in a way that it no longer belongs to that particular group from which it is being separated. For those particular type of separation, it's used, we are going to use le. For the separation within the same section, where we're not going to separate something to be highlighted as a different group, but separate something, even though being a part of that particular that same particular group, depending on its character, but still just merely showing it as, or merely highlighting it, being a part of that group, but still merely highlighting it in certain statement. And then the final one is for the inclusive case, where we're going to use this particle. In inclusive case, one can only use ne. And we're going to talk about these. And these are there are quite a lot of sub-usage group, and we're going to discuss every one of this. Therefore, even though we don't have to have a class on the association, how these names are associated separately, but still we might need 2 classes to explain the usage cases, because there's many sub-usage cases, maybe 3 classes, depends. And then if we have if we have time, then we'll also talk about different type of and different type of effects after or during this particular discussion on this particular case. So these are the 3 usage cases of the ablative case. Now, to sum it up, before the ablative case, we talked about these 6 particles that we have already studied. Raru from the particles used in place of la, yi from the particle which possess e, the related, and particularly the relative case, the 6th grammatical case, raru used for the 2nd, the 4th, and the 7th grammatical case, and the subgroup of the 2nd grammatical case, which is of that itself, and the subgroup of the 7th grammatical case, that is of the time usage case. He and ye belonging to the particles that possesses the first vowel e, ide, and in that there is 2 grammatical case usage. In this particular case, the 6th grammatical case, but as we know, the 3rd grammatical case also functions as an association, functions similar to the 6th grammatical case, so also the 6th grammatical case here. And hang and yang from the ornamental and differentiating case. Ornamental and inclusive case. So this particular particle, hang and yang, will also was also discussed earlier. So the difference between these 6, where the first ra, yi, hang, and ru, yi, yang, is the difference of whether having the punctuation check between the name it is associating to and the particle. So for this 3, one do not punctuation check. For these 3, one should write the punctuation check, as we see in these examples. So for the first 3, ra, yi, hang, one do not require the punctuation check at the end of the name. And so, for example, loptar, it does not require the punctuation between this syllable and this particle. Nye does not require the punctuation. Cho, kong, cho, hang does not require punctuation between cho and hang. Similarly, for the particle ru, yi, yang, one required the punctuation check at the end of the name. Loptar ru, nga yi, and kong cho yang. Okay, so similar to these 3, the 2 particle ho and hum, and the word hu also follows the rule similar to ra, yi, and yi, hum, meaning that they don't require the punctuation check. So q, it does not require the punctuation. Chiu, chao, mio, tam, yu, gam, kyo. You can observe that these do not require the punctuation between the name it associates and the particle. Okay, now the ablative case. There are two particles which are known as the ablative particle, which is ne and le, and they are used in 3 usage case: chungkung, ablative case; kar, separating case; du, inclusive case. And these are dependent particle, not based on the suffix letter, not on the basis of the suffix letter, but these are dependent particle based on the usage case. Based on the usage case, it depends which usage case is a particular statement, and depending on that, the statement will either require ne or le. And this is a different dependency in contrast to the ones which we have been discussing, which is based on the suffix letter. So for separation, so for the ablative case, you can use either ne and le. for separation and of just so for separating case, there are two. Separation as distinguished section, which requires le, whereas for separation within same section, it requires ne. And for inclusive case, you can only use ne. So these we will discuss in detail in our next class when we talk about the usage cases. Okay, so before we have the reading of the verse, if anyone has question, please ask away. After which, I will be reading the verse, and then we will be finishing the class. Okay, so does anyone have questions? If you have questions, please ask away regarding today's lesson. Should I bring the slide on the screen?
là trên thì watching.
Lasso?
Yeah, can I ask regarding the take? So for example, if the word is like miui dongba or diui zhuma, so this is considered one word. How many syllable?
Yes, so this will be so okay, so you want to say like, so this will be a very difficult word to pronounce actually, and normally it is a word. So for example, you want to say like this, right? Mu.
Yes. So like if future, if we want to put it in the what nianga or tikje, so is this considered one syllable or
Yes,
because
it will be
it's very
one
but even if we read it, when we pronounce it, it's one syllable.
yes,
Yui.
it's mu. Mu.
Okay, that's so. And question,
So
the the or and that particle, when we read it in a sentence, how will we know if it's or and?
so we're going to stick with this word statement. So we're only going to refer it as statement, no sentence.
Oh,
Okay, so this was particularly done because I think last time I said that sentence is a word that is very relatively new to a new concept to Tibetans. So it came in the late 19th, early 20th century, when and in the almost in the mid or late 19th century, when the concept of poetry was also introduced into Tibet by the English explorers. So concept of sentence and free, for example, like poetry that was written without considering the rules of the poetry in the traditional way was introduced in that time. So we stick to the term that is used in the 30, so we call it only statement. So your question was how to differentiate whether hum is used as and or hum is used as or, right?
Yes, yes.
So when we have only two things, for example, if we have ngam, khong, in this case we have only two. In this case, hum will be understood as or. And this is because when we have only two phenomena in which we have only two names which needs to be conjoined as in as a and, we already have another particle ngatang khong. So therefore, in this case, it does not require hum to give us the meaning of and. Hum will only be understood as and or comma as a separation of a classification only if there is more than two. So if there is more than two, hum can be understood as comma. But at the end, we see that when we have to say and, we have to use this particular particle, and it cannot be shown by this particle. It always has to be tang when you have to show and, but hum can function as comma.
So again, previously you have the class of the Heart Sutra. So Rinkipumo, this is or, is it?
Yes.
Okay.
That's
So
right.
most of the time it's or, but unless it's more than three, then it's might be and or comma, is it?
Most probably, it's always comma. Whenever you want to use it as and, it will be used with this particle.
Tang.
Tang.
Okay, thank you. I have one last question, but this maybe not regarding to the grammatical thing. So if I may ask, of course you can choose not to
Yes.
answer. I have this how to say, this curiosity to know why you mentioned about the miu what don't droop.
Yes.
This, and then we have the father and mother thing. So why is yum always related to sherab? Why we always use yum chenmo and not yap chenmo? And why is yap is top and yum is sherab?
Lesser. So I will be answering it in the most brief manner, not going to elaborate anything. So I will apologize from the beginning if I don't elaborate anything. So this has to do with more it is an, when we talk about the method and the wisdom, uh, uh, definitely method and wisdom are also very much relevant when we talk about the sutra. But it talks about this functioning of this mechanism which we call tantra. Tantra is everything that has to do with the using of mechanism. And so in order to use this mechanism, it is required for certain energy to be input in that mechanism. As we observe in the very gross manner, we see that every device and mechanism require energy. So it has to do more with the understanding of these energy in the context of on the context of the imputed and imputed imputation. So the thing is that when we say pa and ma, we strongly think that this has to do with the male and female, but it's more like when we have the concept of positive and negative. The positive and negative, when we talk about charges, positive and negative, it's just the different characteristic of these two charges that we impute them as positive and negative. Similarly, in order to use this mechanism, it is required for one to have both the method and the wisdom. And so because of the characteristic, one is imputed as the pa and the other is imputed as the ma. But more detail will only be, I mean, more detail if you want to understand, you have to find a root guru who's going to take you on this journey on understanding what this particular usage of energy and what this particular channeling of energy actually means when it comes to the functioning of the mechanism, because everything within us is nothing but a mechanism that functions, and just like every gross mechanism, it requires energy, and like every energy that is distinguishing, there is classification of energy, and this is merely classification of energy and nothing else. But still there are more explanation, very much more explanation on this, which great scholars, great practitioners have talked about. And for that, like I said, very sorry, I won't be able to emphasize more. Please find very dependent. It says 13 years of examining a guru. So use those 13 years to examine a guru and accept.
Lasso. I'm just curious because why is the like mother is related to Dongpani to share up. This just curiosity, but of course I understand. Thank you, Gela.
Yes, so okay, so thank you for the question. So does anyone else have questions regarding today's lesson? Anyone else has a question regarding today's lesson? So those who have questions, please post them on the group. It's very, very beneficial to everyone. And I'm also, when I write and when I speak, the difference is that when I write, there seems to be more expression in the words, and so you can actually find more information when I write. So please post the same question on the group, and those who have question, please post your question in the group, or you can send it to me, Lasso, and I will answer it in the group. In previous classes, I have had I had some questions in the group, and I enjoyed it very much. And I have already sent one assignment. I don't know how many of you have sent me back. Those who are sending me through the mail, please send it to me through the mail. Those who are sending it to me through Telegram, please send it to me directly. So I will check them and I'll send you my feedback. And some of you have sent me the voice recording. I will answer to them. There won't be particular assignment for this particular class, but we will have assignments for the next class when it comes to the usage case. Please remember, every particle for the dependent particle, introduction to particle, association of the particle, usage case, and the most difficult, most important usage case, because this is what you're going to use when you write something in Tibetan. So therefore, and also please memorize. We will start from Monday. Reciting the text will be from Monday. So please recite the text. And because the reading class will be extended, the schedule for the grammar were already sent, but because the reading class will be extended, the grammar class will be also extended, because according to our earlier schedule, it seems that we were to finish the grammar portion in 1 month. So I think it will extend a little bit. So let's see if we can finish all the dependent particles by then. So we are only left with 2, I think. And then we'll be done with the dependent particle. And then we'll have an exam after the completion of dependent particle. Okay, so please memorize, and let me just read the verse of dedication to complete today's class. Okay. So, Gewati, sorry. Gewati, Drubpay, Madupa. Sherab Ham, Rub Somne. Sherab Nagi Wunchu Rub Topne. Sherab Jambe, Sherab Mai, Ne Kesho. So, what this means is, may all the sentient beings, by the power of the merits accumulated here by all of us, gather in front of the goddess of wisdom. May all of us gather in front of the goddess of wisdom, becoming the master of the speech of wisdom, all of us, and may all be delivered to the pure land of Mother Saraswati, which is the same as the pure land of the Manjushri, which is Vimala. So may everyone have a wonderful day, evening, or afternoon, or night, wherever they are. Thank you very much for participating in this class. I hope it was beneficial. And those who are joining me for the grammar class, I'll see you on Monday. And those who are joining me for the reading class, most probably I'll see you tomorrow. There is a class tomorrow, but if something changes, I will make sure that I inform every one of you. Lasso, thank you, and Tashidele to everyone. Memorize and revise and ask questions. Lasso.